The morning sun cast long shadows across Franklin High School as Lucas Thompson adjusted his noise-canceling headphones for the third time in 5 minutes. The 17-year-old moved through the hallway with measured steps, his eyes fixed on the familiar pattern of blue and gray tiles beneath his feet. Each footstep created a rhythm that only he could hear, a percussion that helped calm the overwhelming symphony of teenage voices, locker slams, and fluorescent light buzzes that filled the corridor. "Lucas, sweetie, don't forget you have your session with Ms. Martinez after school today." His mother, Sarah Thompson, had reminded him that morning over breakfast. Her voice carried that gentle tone she always used when she wanted to make sure he was listening without feeling pressured. Sarah worked as a pediatric nurse at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, and her natural compassion had only deepened since Lucas's autism diagnosis when he was 7 years old. "I know, Mom," Lucas had replied, stirring his oatmeal in exactly 12 clockwise circles, as he did every morning. "She said we're going to work on the bridge of the dance today." Garth Brooks wrote it in 1989, and it reached #1 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart in 1990. David Thompson, Lucas's father, had looked up from his copy of the Tennessean with a proud smile. As a sound engineer at several recording studios around Nashville, David understood his son's deep connection to music better than most. "That's one of the greatest songs ever written, buddy." Garth really knew how to capture something special in that one. Now, walking through the school hallway, Lucas replayed that conversation in his mind. His parents never made him feel different, never made his autism seem like a burden. They celebrated his incredible memory for musical facts, his perfect pitch, and his ability to hear harmonies that others missed. But school was different. School was where Lucas felt most like an outsider looking in. "Hey, music man!" called out Jake Patterson, a senior on the football team. The nickname wasn't meant to be cruel, but it highlighted how Lucas was seen by his peers. The quiet kid who always had headphones on, who knew more about country music than anyone had a right to know, and who sometimes hummed along to songs only he could hear. Lucas nodded politely at Jake and continued toward his first period class. American history with Mrs. Jennifer Walsh was actually one of his favorites because she often incorporated music into her lessons. Last week, she had talked about how folk songs during the Civil War helped soldiers cope with the hardships of battle, and Lucas had stayed after class to share his knowledge about how those folk traditions influenced modern country music. "Good morning, Lucas," Mrs. Walsh greeted him as he took his seat in the third row, exactly 4 seats from the front. "I hope you're ready for today's discussion about the Great Depression. I thought we might talk about how music helped people during those difficult times." Lucas's eyes lit up behind his glasses. This was his element, the intersection of history and music, where facts and melodies came together in perfect harmony. The Carter family recorded "Can the Circle Be Unbroken" in 1935, he said, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke about something he loved. It became an anthem of hope during some of the darkest years in American history. Throughout the class, Lucas contributed insights that amazed his teacher and classmates. He could recite recording dates, chart positions, and the stories behind songs with the precision of a music historian. But when the bell rang and students began their usual chatter about weekend plans and social events, Lucas quietly gathered his books and prepared for the transition to his next class. The day continued in its familiar pattern. Lucas excelled in his academic subjects, particularly when they connected to his special interests. In English class, he wrote a compelling essay about the narrative structure of country ballads. In mathematics, he found comfort in the logical progression of numbers, much like the mathematical relationships he heard in musical intervals and chord progressions. Lunch was always the most challenging part of Lucas's day. The cafeteria was a sensory assault, hundreds of voices talking at once. the clatter of trays and silverware, the squeaking of chairs on linoleum floors. Lucas found his usual spot at a table near the windows, where he could look out at the school's courtyard and mentally escape the chaos around him. He pulled out his phone and opened his music app, scrolling through his carefully organized playlists. His Garth Brooks Complete playlist contained every studio album, live recording, and rare track he could find. Lucas had discovered Garth's music when he was 12, and something about the emotional honesty and storytelling had resonated deeply with him. While other kids his age were listening to pop and hip-hop, Lucas found solace in the authentic narratives of country music. "Mind if I sit here?" asked Emma Rodriguez, a quiet girl from his advanced placement English class. Emma was one of the few students who had ever voluntarily started a conversation with Lucas. "Okay," Lucas replied, removing one earbud but keeping the other in place. A compromise that allowed him to stay connected to his comfort while being polite to others. "What are you listening to?" Emma asked, unwrapping her sandwich. "The Dance" by Garth Brooks. Album version from 1989, not the live version from Double Live in 1998, although that version has a more emotional vocal delivery in the final chorus. Lucas spoke rapidly, as he often did when discussing music. Emma smiled. "I don't know much about country music, but you always seem to really love it. Do you play any instruments?" Lucas nodded. "Piano since I was 8. Guitar since I was 10. I also compose sometimes, but mostly I just like to sing along to existing songs. My music therapist, Ms. Martinez, says I have perfect pitch." "That's amazing. Have you ever performed for anyone?" The question hit Lucas like a physical blow. Performing for others was his greatest fear, and his deepest desire rolled into one impossible contradiction. He had an incredible voice. Even he knew that from recording himself singing. But the thought of being watched, judged, and evaluated by others made his chest tighten with anxiety. "No," he said quietly. "I don't perform. I just sing for myself." After school, Lucas made his way to the music building for his weekly session with Rebecca Martinez, the school's music therapist. Ms. Martinez was a petite woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and an infectious smile. She had been working with students with special needs for over 15 years, and she understood better than anyone how music could be both a refuge and a bridge for young people like Lucas. "How was your day, Lucas?" she asked as he settled into the familiar practice room. The space was specifically designed to be calming: soft lighting, sound-absorbing panels on the walls, and a beautiful upright piano that had been donated by a local music store. "It was acceptable," Lucas replied, using his standard response for days that weren't particularly good or bad. "Emma Rodriguez asked me about performing today. I told her I don't perform for others." Ms. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. She had been gently working with Lucas for 2 years, helping him process his emotions through music, and gradually building his confidence. "Tell me about The Dance again. Why is that song so important to you?" Lucas sat at the piano and played the opening chords with perfect precision. The dance is about taking risks, even when you know they might lead to pain. Garth Brooks has said in interviews that it's about embracing life's experiences, both good and bad, because they're all part of the journey. And how does that relate to your own journey, Lucas? This was the kind of question that would have made Lucas shut down 2 years ago. But Ms. Martinez had earned his trust through patience and genuine understanding. "I think about performing sometimes," he admitted quietly. "I imagine what it would feel like to share music with other people. But then I think about all the things that could go wrong: forgetting words, people laughing, not being able to handle the sensory input. But you also think about what could go right, don't you?" Lucas nodded slowly. "Sometimes I imagine singing The Dance for an audience and having them understand what the song means to me. I imagine them feeling the same way I feel when I hear it." Ms. Martinez smiled encouragingly. "What if we started very small? What if you practiced performing just for me, and then, maybe eventually, for your parents?" "Maybe," Lucas said, and for him, maybe was a significant step forward. As their session continued, Lucas sang "The Dance," with Ms. Martinez accompanying him on piano. His voice was truly extraordinary, rich, emotional, and technically perfect. He understood every nuance of the song, every subtle shift in meaning and melody. When he sang, Lucas transformed from an anxious teenager into a confident artist, even if his only audience was one person who believed in him. After the session, Lucas walked to the school's main auditorium to wait for his father to pick him up. The large space was empty and dimly lit, with only the ghost light illuminating the stage. Lucas stood in the doorway for several minutes, staring at the stage and imagining what it would feel like to stand there and sing. David Thompson arrived 20 minutes later to find his son sitting in the front row of the auditorium, staring up at the empty stage. "How was your session with Ms. Martinez?" David asked, settling into the seat next to Lucas. "Good. We worked on the dance again. She thinks I should try performing for people." David nodded thoughtfully. As someone who worked in the music industry, he had seen countless talented performers, but he had never heard anyone sing with the emotional authenticity that his son possessed. "What do you think about that?" "I'm scared," Lucas admitted. "But I'm also curious about what it would feel like." "That sounds like wisdom to me," David replied. "Some of the best artists I've worked with have told me that they're always a little scared before they perform. The fear means it matters to them." As they drove home through the streets of Nashville, Lucas watched the city where so many musical dreams had been born and nurtured. He wondered if someday he might find the courage to add his voice to that legacy, to take the risk that the dance sang about so eloquently. That night, alone in his room, Lucas sat at his keyboard and sang "The Dance" one more time, imagining an audience that would understand and appreciate the gift he had to offer. He didn't know it yet, but his moment to take that dance was closer than he could have imagined. The following morning brought the kind of crisp October weather that made Nashville feel like the heart of autumn in America. Lucas Thompson walked through the fallen leaves on his way to school, their crunch beneath his feet creating a natural percussion that he unconsciously incorporated into the melody running through his head. Today was different somehow. He could feel it in the way the morning light hit the brick buildings of Franklin High School, in the way his usual anxiety felt less heavy on his shoulders. His first period advanced placement literature class was discussing poetry, and Mrs. Carol Stevens had asked students to bring in examples of modern poetry that spoke to them. While most students had chosen contemporary poets or song lyrics from popular artists, Lucas had brought printed lyrics from The Dance. "Lucas, would you like to share your selection?" Mrs. Stevens asked with genuine interest. She had learned over the semester that Lucas's contributions, while sometimes unexpected, were always thoughtfully prepared. Lucas stood slowly, his printed page trembling slightly in his hands. "I chose The Dance" by Garth Brooks. The lyrics were written by Tony Arata, and they explore the philosophical question of whether we would choose to experience life's painful moments if we knew they were coming. He began to read the lyrics aloud, his voice growing stronger with each line. As he reached the chorus, "I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance," something remarkable happened. The classroom, usually filled with the rustling of papers and whispered conversations, fell completely silent. Even the students who typically showed no interest in academic discussions were listening intently. "That's beautiful, Lucas," said Ashley Morrison, one of the more popular students who had never spoken to him before. I never thought about country music as poetry, but when you read it like that, it really is." Lucas felt a small spark of pride, mixed with surprise. Garth Brooks has said that country music is just storytelling set to melody. It's poetry that people can sing along with. After class, something unprecedented happened. 3 different students stopped Lucas in the hallway to ask about other country songs with meaningful lyrics. For the first time in his high school career, Lucas felt like his knowledge was being appreciated rather than simply tolerated. During lunch, Emma Rodriguez once again joined Lucas at his table by the windows. This time, she wasn't alone. She had brought her friend Marcus Williams, a tall, soft-spoken student who played violin in the school orchestra. "Lucas, Marcus is really interested in country music now after what you shared in Mrs. Stevens's class," Emma explained. "He was wondering if you could recommend some songs that would be good for someone just starting to listen to the genre." Lucas's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of conversation he had always dreamed of having with his peers. "What kind of emotions or stories interest you?" he asked Marcus. "I guess I like music that tells a story about overcoming challenges," Marcus replied. "Something that feels real, you know?" Without hesitation, Lucas began sharing his recommendations. "The River" by Garth Brooks is about a man reflecting on his life and realizing that life is a journey, not a destination. "Unanswered Prayers" explores how sometimes what we think we want isn't what we actually need. And "Standing Outside the Fire" is about taking risks and living life fully instead of playing it safe. As Lucas spoke, more students began gathering around their table. Word had somehow spread about the quiet music expert who could explain country songs like literature professors explained classic novels. By the end of lunch, Lucas found himself surrounded by 8 classmates, all listening intently as he shared stories about the songs and artists that meant so much to him. "You should totally audition for the talent show," suggested Ashley Morrison. "It's coming up in 3 weeks, and I bet you'd be amazing." The suggestion hit Lucas like a lightning bolt. The talent show was one of Franklin High School's biggest events, held annually in the main auditorium with an audience of over 800 students, teachers, and parents. The thought of performing in front of so many people made Lucas's chest tighten with familiar anxiety. "I don't perform in public," he said quickly, gathering his lunch items and preparing to leave. "But Lucas," Emma said gently, "you just performed for all of us right now. You shared something you love, and we all connected with it. That's what performing really is." That afternoon, Lucas's session with Ms. Martinez took on a different energy. He told her about the conversations at lunch, about how students had actually listened to him and asked follow-up questions. "It sounds like you found your voice today in a different way," Ms. Martinez observed as Lucas warmed up with some vocal exercises. "They suggested I audition for the talent show," Lucas said, running his fingers over the piano keys. "But that's impossible. 800 people watching me? I can't even imagine it." Ms. Martinez nodded understandingly. "What if we approached it differently? What if, instead of thinking about performing for 800 strangers, you thought about sharing something meaningful with people who are starting to understand your passion for music?" Lucas considered this as he began playing the opening chords to The Dance. "When I was explaining the songs to Marcus and Emma and the others, I wasn't nervous. I was excited. I wanted them to understand why the music matters." That's exactly right. When you focus on sharing something you love rather than worrying about being judged, your authentic self comes through. They spent the rest of the session working on performance techniques. Not just vocal techniques, but ways to manage anxiety and stay connected to the emotional core of a song even when feeling nervous. Ms. Martinez taught Lucas breathing exercises and visualization techniques used by professional performers. "Let's try something," she said near the end of their session. I want you to sing the dance while imagining you're sharing it with someone who really needs to hear its message. Don't think about technique or hitting perfect notes. Just think about communicating something important. Lucas sat at the piano and began to play. As he started singing, he thought about a conversation he'd had with his father the previous weekend. David had shared stories about musicians he'd worked with who had overcome significant challenges. Artists who had found ways to turn their struggles into songs that helped other people feel less alone. As Lucas sang, his voice took on a quality that even surprised Ms. Martinez. The technical perfection was still there, but now it was infused with genuine emotion and purpose. He wasn't just singing the words, he was living them, sharing them, offering them as a gift to anyone who might need to hear them. When he finished, the practice room was silent for several moments. "Lucas," Ms. Martinez said softly, "that was extraordinary. You weren't performing just now. You were communicating. You were sharing a piece of your heart." After the session, Lucas walked through the school hallways with a different kind of awareness. He noticed things he had never paid attention to before: the way certain students sat alone at lunch, the expressions on faces that suggested hidden struggles, the quiet conversations about family problems and social anxiety that happened in the spaces between classes. For the first time, Lucas began to understand that his gift for music wasn't just about his own enjoyment or self-expression. Maybe, just maybe, it was something that could help other people feel less alone. That evening at dinner, Lucas surprised his parents by bringing up the talent show. "Several students suggested I audition," he told them, carefully cutting his chicken into equal-sized pieces. "Ms. Martinez thinks I might be ready to try performing for a larger group." Sarah Thompson nearly dropped her fork. In 17 years of parenting Lucas, she had never heard him express interest in any kind of public performance. "How do you feel about that idea, sweetheart?" "Terrified," Lucas admitted honestly, "but also curious. Today at lunch, when I was talking about music with other students, I felt different. I felt like I had something valuable to share." David leaned forward with interest. "What song would you want to perform?" "The dance," Lucas replied without hesitation. "It's the song that means the most to me, and I think its message about taking risks and embracing life's experiences might be meaningful to other people too." His parents exchanged a look of amazement and pride. They had always known their son had extraordinary talent, but seeing him contemplate sharing that talent with others represented a breakthrough they had hardly dared to hope for. "Whatever you decide, we'll support you completely," Sarah said. "But remember, there's no pressure. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." "I know," Lucas said. "But maybe it's time I took my own advice about the dance. Maybe it's time I stopped standing outside the fire." That night, Lucas lay in bed listening to live recordings of Garth Brooks' concerts, paying attention not just to the music, but to the connection between the artist and the audience. He could hear it in Garth's voice, the vulnerability, the invitation, the shared experience of being human in all its complexity and beauty. For the first time in his life, Lucas allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to create that kind of connection with others. The thought was still frightening, but it was also thrilling in a way he had never experienced before. As he drifted off to sleep, Lucas made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would ask Ms. Martinez about the audition requirements for the talent show. Tomorrow, he would take the first step toward his own dance. The auditorium was eerily quiet as Lucas Thompson stood in the doorway, his guitar case in one hand and his sheet music in the other. It was 7:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, 30 minutes before the talent show auditions were scheduled to begin. Ms. Martinez had arranged for him to audition first, when the space would be less crowded and the environment more manageable for his sensory needs. Principal Robert Hayes, Ms. Martinez, and the drama teacher, Mr. Kenneth Park, sat in the front row with their evaluation sheets. Lucas had met with each of them individually over the past week to discuss his accommodation needs. He would perform with just piano accompaniment. He could use his own microphone to avoid sensory issues with unfamiliar equipment, and he would be allowed to have Ms. Martinez in the auditorium during his audition for emotional support. "Good morning, Lucas," Principal Hayes called out warmly. "We're excited to hear what you've prepared for us." Lucas walked slowly toward the stage, his footsteps echoing in the empty auditorium. He had practiced this moment dozens of times with Ms. Martinez, visualizing every step from entering the space to beginning his song. Despite all the preparation, his heart was beating so rapidly he could hear it in his ears. He set up his music stand next to the piano and adjusted the microphone to the correct height. These small, familiar actions helped ground him in the moment and reminded him of all the successful practice sessions he'd had over the past 3 weeks. "I'm going to perform The Dance by Garth Brooks," Lucas announced, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. The lyrics were written by Tony Arata, and the song was released in 1989 as the 4th single from Garth's self-titled debut album. Mr. Park smiled at the detailed introduction. It was exactly the kind of thorough preparation he appreciated in student performers. Lucas sat at the piano and placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, he closed his eyes and thought about all the conversations that had led him to this moment. His discussion with Emma and Marcus at lunch, his sessions with Ms. Martinez, his parents' unwavering support, and his own growing understanding that music was meant to be shared. He began with the gentle piano introduction, his fingers finding the familiar chords with muscle memory developed through hundreds of practice sessions. When he started singing, something remarkable happened. All his nervousness transformed into focus. Instead of worrying about the judges' reactions, Lucas found himself thinking about the story he wanted to tell and the emotion he wanted to share. His voice filled the auditorium with a richness and authenticity that surprised even Ms. Martinez, who had been working with him for over 2 years. Lucas wasn't just singing the words, he was inhabiting them, offering them as a gift to anyone who might need to hear about the courage required to fully engage with life. As he reached the chorus, "I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance," Lucas opened his eyes and looked directly at the judges. For the first time in his life, he wasn't performing for approval or evaluation. He was sharing something that mattered to him, trusting that his authentic expression would resonate with others. When he finished the final note, the auditorium was completely silent for several seconds. Principal Hayes was the first to speak. "Lucas, that was absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us." Ms. Martinez wiped away tears she hadn't realized were forming. In 15 years of working with students with special needs, she had never witnessed such a complete transformation. The anxious, self-conscious teenager who had walked into the auditorium 30 minutes earlier had somehow become a confident, compelling performer. The talent show is scheduled for Friday, November 15th, Mr. Park explained. "You'll be performing for an audience of approximately 800 people. Are you prepared for that?" Lucas considered the question carefully. 3 weeks ago, the thought of performing for 800 people would have sent him into a panic attack. Now, while still nervous, he felt something different, anticipation mixed with purpose. "I think so," he said. "I want to share this song with people who might need to hear it." Over the following 3 weeks, Lucas's world expanded in ways he never could have imagined. Word had spread throughout Franklin High School that the quiet kid with the encyclopedic knowledge of country music was going to perform in the talent show. Students who had never spoken to him before began stopping him in the hallways to wish him luck or ask about his song choice. More importantly, Lucas found himself having genuine conversations with classmates about music, emotions, and the challenges of teenage life. Emma Rodriguez introduced him to her younger brother, who was struggling with social anxiety. And Lucas spent an afternoon sharing songs that had helped him cope with similar feelings. Marcus Williams invited Lucas to attend a school orchestra concert, where Lucas was amazed by the technical skill and emotional expression of classical music performed by his peers. His relationship with his parents also deepened during this period. David began sharing more stories about his work in recording studios, and Lucas started accompanying him to some weekend sessions where he could observe professional musicians at work. Sarah, who had always been protective of her son's emotional well-being, began to see him develop a new kind of resilience and self-confidence. The most significant change, however, was in Lucas's sessions with Ms. Martinez. Their work together evolved from therapy to artistic collaboration, with Ms. Martinez helping Lucas refine his performance while ensuring he maintained his authentic emotional connection to the music. "Remember," she told him during their final practice session before the talent show, "you're not performing for 800 strangers. You're sharing something meaningful with 800 people who chose to come hear music tonight. Some of them might need to hear exactly what you have to offer." The night of the talent show, Lucas arrived at school 2 hours early. His parents, his younger cousin Michael, and even his paternal grandparents had come to support him. Ms. Martinez met him in the music room for a final warm-up and meditation session. "How are you feeling?" she asked as Lucas ran through some vocal exercises. "Different than I expected," Lucas replied thoughtfully. "I'm nervous, but I'm also excited. I keep thinking about the people in the audience who might be going through something difficult and how this song might help them feel less alone." As the auditorium filled with students, teachers, and family members, Lucas waited backstage with the other performers. He was scheduled to perform 8th out of 12 acts, which Ms. Martinez had strategically arranged to give him time to observe the audience and settle into the environment. The performances before his were impressive. A dance routine by the school's hip-hop club, a comedy monologue by the class president, a violin solo by Marcus Williams that earned a standing ovation. Lucas watched from the wings, noting how each performer brought their unique talents and perspectives to the stage. When Mr. Park announced his name, Lucas walked onto the stage with steady steps. The bright lights made it difficult to see individual faces in the audience, which actually helped with his anxiety. He adjusted the microphone, sat at the piano, and looked out at the sea of people who had come to celebrate student talent. "Good evening," he said, his voice clear and confident. "I'm Lucas Thompson, and I'm going to perform The Dance by Garth Brooks. This song is about having the courage to fully engage with life, even when we know it might involve pain or disappointment. It's about choosing to participate in the dance of life rather than watching from the sidelines." As he began the piano introduction, Lucas felt a profound sense of calm wash over him. This was his moment, not to prove himself or impress anyone, but to share something that had profoundly shaped his understanding of what it meant to be human. His voice filled the auditorium with the same authenticity and emotional depth he had discovered during his audition. But now it was amplified by weeks of preparation and a clear sense of purpose. He sang not just for himself, but for everyone in the audience who had ever felt afraid to take risks, who had ever wondered whether the possibility of pain was worth the chance for joy. As he reached the final chorus, Lucas made eye contact with his parents in the third row. He could see the pride and amazement in their faces, but more than that, he could see their recognition that their son had found his voice in the deepest sense of that phrase. When he played the final chord and sang the last note, the auditorium erupted in applause. But it wasn't just polite appreciation. It was the kind of enthusiastic response that indicated genuine emotional connection. Students were on their feet. Teachers were wiping away tears, and Lucas could hear individual voices calling out words of encouragement and appreciation. As he stood to take his bow, Lucas felt something he had never experienced before: the profound satisfaction of having shared his authentic self with others, and having that gift received with gratitude and understanding. He had taken the dance, and in doing so, he had discovered not just his ability to perform, but his capacity to touch other people's lives through music. What he didn't know was that his performance that night had been witnessed by someone who would soon change his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. In the back of the auditorium, having slipped in unnoticed during the third act, Garth Brooks had been quietly observing the talent show as part of his research for a new charitable foundation focused on supporting young musicians. He had been moved by several of the performances, but Lucas's rendition of "The Dance" had stopped him in his tracks. As the show concluded and families began gathering in the lobby to congratulate the performers, Garth quietly made his way backstage to speak with the teachers about the remarkable young man who had just given one of the most authentic performances of his signature song that he had ever heard. The week following the talent show passed in a blur of congratulations and new experiences for Lucas Thompson. Students who had never acknowledged his existence were stopping him in hallways to praise his performance. Teachers were complimenting not just his musical ability, but his courage in sharing something so personal with such a large audience. Even the school janitor, Mr. Eddie Walsh, had sought him out to say that the song had reminded him of his late wife, and how grateful he was to have had their years together, despite the pain of losing her. Lucas was discovering something profound about the power of authentic artistic expression. When you share something that truly matters to you, it creates space for others to connect with their own deepest emotions and experiences. It was during this period of adjustment to his newfound recognition that Ms. Martinez approached him with an unusual request. "Lucas, I have something interesting to discuss with you," she said, as they settled into their usual practice room for his weekly session. "I received a phone call yesterday from someone who attended your performance at the talent show." Lucas looked up from the piano with curiosity. He had grown accustomed to compliments over the past week, but something in Ms. Martinez's tone suggested this was different. The caller introduced himself as Mike Palmer, and he said he works with charitable organizations that support young musicians. He was very impressed with your performance and wanted to know if you might be interested in participating in a special project. "What kind of project?" Lucas asked, his analytical mind immediately wanting to understand all the details. That's the interesting part. He was somewhat vague about the specifics. He mentioned something about a mentorship opportunity and possibly recording a demo, but he said he'd prefer to discuss the details in person. He's asked if you'd be willing to meet with him tomorrow after school. Lucas felt his familiar anxiety beginning to rise. Meeting with strangers, especially about something as important as his music, triggered all his concerns about social interaction and potential judgment. "Would you be there too?" he asked Ms. Martinez. "Absolutely. And your parents would need to be involved in any discussions about opportunities outside of school." Mr. Palmer understood that completely and said he'd be happy to meet with all of us together. That evening, Lucas discussed the mysterious opportunity with his parents over dinner. David Thompson's experience in the music industry made him naturally cautious about unsolicited offers, but also curious about legitimate opportunities for his son. "Did Ms. Martinez provide any other details about this Mr. Palmer?" David asked. "She said he seemed very knowledgeable about the music industry and that he spoke specifically about Lucas's emotional connection to the dance," Sarah replied, having spoken with Ms. Martinez by phone that afternoon. Lucas carefully considered the situation. "I'm interested in learning more, but I want to make sure it's something that feels right for me. I don't want to do anything just because it seems like an opportunity." His parents exchanged a proud glance. Over the past month, they had watched their son develop not just artistic confidence, but also better judgment about situations that might affect his well-being. The next afternoon, Lucas, his parents, and Ms. Martinez gathered in the school's main conference room to meet with Mike Palmer. The man who arrived was in his 40s, casually dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt, with a warm smile and an easy manner that immediately put Lucas at ease. "Thank you all for taking the time to meet with me," Mike said as they settled around the conference table. "I want to start by saying that Lucas's performance last Friday was truly exceptional. I've been involved with young musicians for over 20 years, and I rarely encounter someone with such authentic emotional connection to their material." David leaned forward with interest. "Can you tell us more about your background? And what kind of opportunity you're discussing?" Mike smiled and pulled out a business card. "I work with the Teammates for Kids Foundation, which was established by Garth Brooks to support various charitable causes, including programs for young musicians with special talents or needs." Lucas's eyes widened at the mention of Garth Brooks, but Mike continued before he could respond. "What I'm about to tell you might be hard to believe, but Garth was actually in the audience for your talent show last Friday. He's been visiting schools around Nashville as part of his research for expanding the Foundation's music education programs." The room fell silent. Sarah Thompson put her hand over her mouth in surprise, while David sat back in his chair with amazement. Lucas felt his heart racing, but not with anxiety this time, with pure disbelief and excitement. "Garth Brooks was at our talent show?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was," Mike confirmed with a gentle smile. "He tries to keep these visits low-key so students can perform naturally, without the pressure of knowing he's there. But Lucas, your performance of The Dance moved him deeply. He said it was one of the most authentic interpretations of that song he's ever heard." Ms. Martinez leaned forward, her professional curiosity engaged. "What exactly is the opportunity you're offering?" Garth would like to meet Lucas personally. He's particularly interested in supporting young artists who use music as a way to connect with others and overcome personal challenges. He sees Lucas as exactly the kind of artist the Foundation wants to encourage. Lucas tried to process this information. Garth Brooks, his musical hero, the artist whose songs had helped him understand his own emotions and find his voice, had been sitting in the audience during his performance. The thought was both thrilling and overwhelming. "When would this meeting happen?" David asked, his parental protectiveness balanced with recognition of how significant this opportunity could be for his son. "That would be entirely up to Lucas and your family," Mike replied. "Garth is recording at Sound Kitchen Studios next week, and he thought it might be interesting for Lucas to observe a professional recording session. If Lucas is comfortable with that environment, Garth would love to talk with him about music, and maybe even hear him perform in a more intimate setting." Lucas looked around the table at the faces of the people who had supported his musical journey. His parents, who had never made his autism feel like a limitation. Ms. Martinez, who had helped him find the courage to share his gift with others. And now this kind stranger who was offering him a chance to meet his hero. "I would like to meet him," Lucas said quietly. "But I'm scared too. What if I can't think of anything to say? What if I get overwhelmed by the recording studio environment?" Mike nodded understandingly. "Garth specifically asked me to emphasize that there's no pressure. He just wants to meet the young man who sang his song with such genuine emotion. You could bring your parents and Ms. Martinez if that would help you feel more comfortable. The studio has quiet spaces where you can take breaks if you need them." Sarah Thompson spoke up with the protective instinct of a mother who had spent years advocating for her son's needs. "What exactly would Garth expect from Lucas? We want to make sure this is a positive experience for him, not something that creates pressure or anxiety." "Honestly, Mrs. Thompson, I think Garth just wants to have a conversation about music with someone who clearly understands it on a deep level. He's particularly interested in how Lucas uses music to process emotions and connect with others. There's no agenda beyond that. No expectations about future performances or recording opportunities. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Mike patiently answering questions and providing details about the proposed visit to Sound Kitchen Studios. By the end of the conversation, everyone agreed that this was an opportunity worth exploring, with careful attention to Lucas's comfort and well-being. As they prepared to leave, Mike turned to Lucas with a final thought. "Lucas, Garth asked me to tell you something specific. He said that The Dance is a song about having the courage to fully engage with life's experiences. He thinks you've already proven you have that courage by sharing your music with others. And he's honored that you chose his song to express something so meaningful." That evening, Lucas sat in his room with his guitar, playing through The Dance and trying to comprehend that Garth Brooks himself had heard him perform it. The idea still seemed surreal, but beneath the disbelief was a growing sense of excitement and possibility. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma Rodriguez. "I heard about your meeting today. Is it true that Garth Brooks wants to meet you?" Word was already spreading through the school's efficient gossip network. But Lucas found that he didn't mind the attention this time. The opportunity felt like a natural extension of the journey he had begun when he first decided to audition for the talent show. Over the weekend, Lucas and his family visited Sound Kitchen Studios to familiarize him with the environment before the planned meeting with Garth Brooks. The studio staff, who had been briefed about Lucas's needs, were welcoming and understanding, showing him the quiet spaces he could use if he became overwhelmed and explaining how the recording process worked. David Thompson was impressed by the professionalism and accommodation-focused approach of everyone involved. They really seemed to understand that this needs to work for Lucas, not the other way around, he told Sarah that evening. Lucas spent the weekend practicing songs he might perform for Garth Brooks if the opportunity arose. But more importantly, he thought about the questions he wanted to ask his musical hero. How did Garth connect so deeply with audiences? How did he choose songs that would resonate with people's life experiences? How did he manage the vulnerability required to share such personal emotions through music? Ms. Martinez arranged to meet with Lucas on Monday morning before school to help him prepare emotionally for the upcoming encounter. "Remember, Lucas, this meeting is happening because Garth Brooks was genuinely moved by your performance. You don't need to be anyone other than who you are, the thoughtful, talented young man who sang The Dance with such authenticity." "I keep thinking about what I want to say to him," Lucas admitted. "There are so many things I'd like to ask about songwriting and performing and connecting with audiences." "Those sound like exactly the right kinds of questions," Ms. Martinez encouraged. Garth Brooks is known for being generous with young artists and for genuinely caring about the emotional impact of music. I think you'll find that he's as interested in learning from you as you are in learning from him. The day of the meeting arrived with unseasonably warm weather for November in Nashville. Lucas dressed carefully in his best jeans and a button-down shirt, carrying his guitar case and a notebook filled with questions he had written over the weekend. As their car pulled into the parking lot of Sound Kitchen Studios, Lucas felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness. But this time, the excitement was stronger. He was about to meet the artist whose music had helped him understand his own emotions and find his voice. More than that, he was about to share his own musical journey with someone who would truly understand its significance. "Ready?" David asked, turning around from the driver's seat to look at his son. Lucas took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm ready to take the dance." Sound Kitchen Studios buzzed with the controlled energy of a professional recording session in progress. Lucas Thompson stood in the lobby with his parents and Ms. Martinez, trying to absorb the reality that somewhere in this building, Garth Brooks was working on music that would eventually reach millions of people around the world. Mike Palmer appeared from a hallway, his familiar smile helping to ease the nervous tension that had been building in Lucas throughout the morning. "Perfect timing," Mike said warmly. "Garth just finished laying down vocals for a track, and he's excited to meet you, Lucas." He set up in Studio B, which is one of our quieter spaces. As they walked through the corridor, Lucas noticed the gold and platinum records lining the walls, visual reminders of the incredible music that had been created in these rooms. His analytical mind automatically began cataloging the artists and albums he recognized, a familiar mental exercise that helped calm his anxiety. "Before we go in," Mike said, stopping outside a door marked Studio B, "I want you to know that Garth specifically asked me to create the most comfortable environment possible for this meeting. There's no timeline, no expectations, and no pressure. He genuinely just wants to meet the young man whose performance moved him so deeply." Lucas nodded, adjusting his guitar strap and taking a deep breath. As Mike opened the door, Lucas stepped into a spacious but intimate studio space. Acoustic panels covered the walls, creating a warm, enveloping atmosphere. A beautiful grand piano sat in one corner, and several comfortable chairs were arranged in a circle. And there, rising from one of those chairs, with a genuine smile that Lucas had seen in countless photographs and videos, was Garth Brooks himself. "Lucas," Garth said, extending his hand with the kind of warmth that immediately put people at ease. "It's an honor to meet you, son. I'm Garth." For a moment, Lucas stood frozen, trying to reconcile the larger-than-life figure he had admired for years with the approachable, down-to-earth man standing before him. Then his natural politeness kicked in, and he stepped forward to shake Garth's hand. "It's an honor to meet you too, Mr. Brooks," Lucas replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Your music has meant more to me than I can express in words." "Please, call me Garth," the country superstar said, then turned to greet Lucas's parents and Ms. Martinez with the same genuine warmth. "And thank you all for making this meeting possible. Lucas, I have to tell you, your performance of The Dance last Friday was absolutely extraordinary." As everyone settled into the comfortable chairs, Garth leaned forward with the attentive posture of someone genuinely interested in hearing what others had to say. "Lucas, Mike told me a little bit about your musical journey, but I'd love to hear it from you. How did you discover The Dance? And what does that song mean to you?" Lucas felt his initial nervousness beginning to fade as he recognized that Garth was asking the kind of thoughtful question that invited genuine conversation rather than performance. "I discovered your music when I was 12, Lucas began, his voice growing stronger as he talked about something he loved. "I was going through a difficult time socially at school, and my dad played The River for me one evening. Something about the way you told stories through songs helped me understand my own emotions better." Garth nodded encouragingly, clearly engaged with Lucas's story. "The Dance became special to me because it's about having the courage to fully engage with life, even when you know it might involve pain or disappointment. As someone with autism, I often feel like I'm watching life from the sidelines, afraid to participate because social situations can be overwhelming or confusing. But that song taught me that the dance, the full experience of life, is worth the risk." "That's exactly what Tony Arata and I hoped that song would communicate," Garth replied, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "But Lucas, hearing you sing it the other night, I learned something new about my own song. You brought an authenticity and emotional depth to it that reminded me why I fell in love with that song in the first place." David Thompson spoke up with fatherly pride. Lucas has always had perfect pitch and an incredible memory for music, but watching him develop the courage to share his gift with others has been the most rewarding part of this journey for Sarah and me. "Perfect pitch is a wonderful gift," Garth acknowledged. But what I heard in Lucas's performance went far beyond technical ability. I heard someone who understood the heart of the song and was willing to share that understanding with others. Ms. Martinez added her perspective as a music therapist. Lucas has taught me that sometimes our greatest challenges can become our greatest strengths. His autism gives him a unique way of processing and connecting with music that allows him to access emotions and meanings that others might miss. Garth turned back to Lucas with obvious interest. I'd love to hear more about how you experience music differently. What do you hear or feel that helps you connect so deeply with songs? Lucas considered the question carefully. It was the kind of inquiry that required him to articulate something he had never fully put into words before. When I listen to music, I hear all the individual elements, the bass line, the harmony vocals, the way the drums interact with the melody. But I also hear how they all work together to create emotion, Lucas explained. With the dance, I can hear how the gentle piano introduction creates vulnerability, how your vocal delivery becomes more passionate as the song builds, and how the final chorus feels like both an ending and a beginning. That's remarkable, Garth said, genuinely impressed. You're describing music theory and emotional analysis at a level that some professional musicians never reach. Have you written any songs yourself? Lucas shook his head. I've tried, but mostly I prefer to interpret existing songs. I like finding new meanings in music that already exists. That's a valuable skill too, Garth assured him. Some of the best performers in history have been interpreters rather than writers. The ability to find personal meaning in someone else's words and music, and then share that meaning with others, is a real gift. Mike Palmer, who had been quietly observing the interaction, spoke up. Garth, would you like to hear Lucas perform something? Lucas felt his familiar performance anxiety beginning to rise, but Garth seemed to sense his hesitation. Only if you'd like to, Lucas. But I'll tell you what, if you're willing to play something, I'd be honored to accompany you on piano. Sometimes it's easier to perform when you're not carrying the whole musical load yourself. The offer was both thrilling and terrifying. The thought of performing with Garth Brooks was beyond anything Lucas had ever imagined, but it also felt like a natural extension of the conversation they'd been having. Could we do the dance? Lucas asked quietly. I'd love that, Garth replied, moving toward the grand piano. Same key as the recording? Lucas nodded and pulled his guitar from its case. As Garth settled at the piano and played the familiar opening chords, Lucas felt a sense of calm wash over him. This wasn't a performance in the traditional sense. It was a musical conversation between two people who understood the deeper meaning of the song they were about to share. As Lucas began to sing, something magical happened in that small studio space. His voice blended with Garth's piano accompaniment in a way that felt completely natural, as if they had been making music together for years. Lucas found himself singing not just the lyrics, but the emotion behind them, the personal journey that had brought him to this moment. When they reached the chorus, Garth began singing harmony, his famous voice supporting and enhancing Lucas's lead vocal rather than overwhelming it. The effect was stunning. Two generations of musicians connected by their shared love of a song about courage and vulnerability. As they finished the final verse and chorus, the studio fell silent, except for the gentle decay of the piano's final chord. Lucas looked up to see his parents wiping away tears, Ms. Martinez beaming with pride, and Mike Palmer shaking his head in amazement. Lucas, Garth said softly, that was one of the most beautiful performances of that song I've ever been part of. Thank you for sharing that with me. For the next hour, Lucas and Garth continued their conversation about music, life, and the connections between the two. Garth shared stories about his own journey as a performer, including his struggles with stage fright and the vulnerability required to share personal emotions through song. Lucas asked thoughtful questions about songwriting, audience connection, and the responsibility that comes with having a platform to reach people through music. "Lucas, I want you to know that you have a real gift," Garth said, as their time together began to wind down. "Not just your voice or your musical ability, but your capacity to find authentic meaning in music and share that with others. That's something that can't be taught. It's something you either have or you don't. And you definitely have it." "What should I do with it?" Lucas asked, the question that had been forming in his mind throughout their conversation. "Keep sharing it," Garth replied without hesitation. "Keep finding ways to connect with people through music. Whether that's performing for small groups or large audiences, whether it's teaching other young people about music, or whether it's something we haven't even thought of yet. The important thing is that you don't hide this gift. The world needs authentic voices like yours." As they prepared to leave, Garth had one final surprise for Lucas. "I'd like you to have this," he said, handing Lucas a beautiful acoustic guitar case. "This guitar has been with me for over 20 years. It's been on stages all over the world, and it's been part of some of my most meaningful musical moments. I think it's ready for a new chapter with someone who will honor its history while creating new music with it." Lucas accepted the gift with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the generosity and significance of the gesture. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Just promise me you'll keep making music," Garth replied. "And remember that every time you share your gift with others, you're giving them something they can't get anywhere else. Your unique perspective, your authentic voice, your way of understanding the world through music." As they drove home from the studio, Lucas sat in the back seat holding Garth's guitar and trying to process everything that had happened. The shy, anxious teenager who had been afraid to sing in front of others just a few months earlier had somehow evolved into someone worthy of recognition from one of country music's greatest artists. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked, turning around to look at her son. "Different," Lucas replied honestly. "Not just because I met Garth Brooks, but because I think I finally understand what I'm supposed to do with my music. I'm supposed to share it, not just for my own satisfaction, but because it might help other people feel less alone." That evening, Lucas sat in his room with Garth's guitar, playing through "The Dance" one more time. But now the song carried new meaning. It wasn't just about his own journey of finding courage to engage with life. It was about his responsibility to use his gifts to help others find their own courage, their own voice, their own willingness to take the dance. As he played the final chord, Lucas realized that his story was just beginning. The quiet teenager who had once been afraid to be noticed had discovered not just his voice, but his purpose. And like the song that had started it all, Lucas understood that the most meaningful moments in life often come from taking risks, being vulnerable, and choosing to fully engage with the beautiful, challenging, rewarding dance of human connection. The boy who had sung for an empty auditorium, not knowing he was being heard, had found his way to a stage where his voice could reach anyone who needed to hear it. And in finding his voice, Lucas Thompson had discovered that sometimes the greatest gift we can give others is simply the courage to be authentically ourselves.